From a very young age, I struggled with identity, with the idea of who I was, with the idea of being loved. My dad left when we were really young, about 2 years old. And for me, that's something that very early on defined who I was. Really struggled with the idea of not having a dad and the idea of being loved. And that just progressively got worse as I got older. I was the kid that everyone picked on in elementary school. Literally, books knocked out of my hand, pushed into walls, called names, just picked on all the time. So, not only did I feel unloved by a dad that wasn't there, but now I felt unloved by the world around me, and really began to just struggle with the idea of who I was. And in a very real sense, it was the world around me that began to define that for me. And I began to identify myself by the way everyone else did. And that's, how it was all the way through, elementary school. Middle school, we switched to a new school, so I had the opportunity to kind of rebrand myself, if you would. So I, got the clothes I needed to have, picked up the attitude I need to have to make friends with the kids I need to make friends with. That way I didn't get picked on anymore. So I did that in middle school when we made that transition. But it turns out that all those kids were the kids that were into drugs and alcohol. So I got pulled into that very quickly. And that was really my life, during, before I met Jesus, before I encountered who he was and how much he loved me, was this lost boy that didn't understand who he was, that felt like he was unlovable, and that grabbed hold of anything he could to fill that void.
What were the events, do you recall, leading up to you turning to Jesus?
Yeah, so that started when I was playing basketball in the park by myself one day, and a kid comes up to me and he says, hey, you want to play one-on-one? His name was Frankie, and he was really short, hair down to his butt. I was about 6'1", and just thinking, I'm gonna destroy this kid. Anyway, we ended up just really kicking it off. He beat me pretty bad the first couple games we played, and but we ended up becoming friends and just hanging out a lot. And about 4 or 5 months down the road, he said, hey, you want to come to church with me? And I told him, I said, if there's a God out there, he hasn't wanted to have much to do with me. So I have no desire to go to church or anything like that. He said, well, they have an indoor basketball court. So I was like, okay, I'll go. So I started going for teens, just for youth group on Wednesday nights. I would go play basketball, goof off during the message. And through that whole process, I met a couple named Dave and Debbie Simpson that just took on the task of loving me. And in a very real sense, Dave took on the task of being that father figure in my life. I can remember him coming over, on Saturday mornings at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, banging on the door. Hey, Kirk, come on. And he would come get me. Sometimes I'd be stoned. Sometimes I'd still be hungover from the night before. But he was always there. I mean, every weekend you could count on Dave being there. And so me and Frankie started hanging out a lot more. And me and Frankie started hanging out with Dave and Debbie a lot. I can remember staying nights over at their house. They would invite me and Frankie over for the weekend, and we would just stay the night and ride four-wheelers or goof off. And so my first introduction to Jesus or God was the people he put in my life to love me. And it was through that, I think, that God opened the door for me to be ready for the message of the gospel, which happened on one Wednesday night at youth group. Youth pastor was up there giving the gospel message, which he had probably done 1 billion times since then. I was in the back goofing off, and I can just remember a voice inside me saying, hey, shut up and listen. And I began to listen to Pastor Dave, and he began to talk about how Jesus came not to prove that he was better than us, but that he came because he loved us so much, cared for us so much, valued us so much, that he came to pay the debt of sin in our lives, and just continued to share the gospel message of who Jesus was and what he came to do. And he gave an altar call after that. And of course, there was people from school and stuff there, so I didn't want to go down in front in tears or anything like that. So I decided that I wasn't going to go down for the altar call. And it's always amazing to me how God works and how God knows what he's doing, because at the time, the youth pastor's office was the door right before you get to the gym. So you have to walk by his door to get to the gym. So they released us to go play hoops, and as I was walking past Dave Kurt's office, that voice inside me again just said, hey, why don't you just go in and talk to him? Just go in and talk to him. So I went in and said, hey, Dave, can I talk to you? And he said, yeah. I shared my life with him, and he began to share how much God loved me. And again, just talk about Jesus and the amazing gift of the cross and what that means for our lives. And I ended up accepting Jesus that night, and then just started, running after him ever since. His love through people, that was a defining factor for my salvation, was just being loved by God's people the way that Jesus would have loved me. And God has been faithful to continually put people in my life that love me in that way. And I know for me in particular, that's one of the things that the enemy will continually bring up in my life, and something that I'm probably going to fight, my entire life, as this idea of being loved. So for me, the big defining one is just seeing God's love through his people, and just God being faithful to continually put those people in my life. I guess another one for me is just his faithfulness, even when I didn't know him, to sustain me from stuff or keep me from stuff. I did a lot of stuff like drugs and alcohol and all that stuff early on, and it's easy to get caught and in trouble and all of those things through that. And I don't think it's a coincidence that I was able to sustain from all that stuff, as far as getting into any real serious trouble, especially with the people I was hanging out with. It was just kind of God's protection through that whole process, his faithfulness to do that. And then, of course, I guess the last one for me would just be his faithfulness, his relentless pursuit of me. Even since I've got saved, there have been times where I've either been encouraged to or started to walk away, and God has always been faithful to reach out and grab me and say, hey, I still got you. So his faithfulness to me has been huge also.
How's that affected your ability to now then love and accept
other people? Right, so for me, that's something that's just come real natural, because I know I identify with people that are there. I understand the need, I understand the depression and everything that brings on somebody. And I also understand the amazing love that's in Christ, the amazing love that God has for people, the tremendous value that God puts on people. And I think that is one of my life callings, is to find people that are in that place where they don't know who they are, and they struggle with the idea of, can anybody love me? And not only proclaim God's love, but show God's love to people. And I think that there are a lot of people in the world today that need that. So yeah, for me, that just comes naturally, because I know what it's like to be in the spot without it. For me, one of my life verses, one of the verses I go to for encouragement and just moving forward in my walk with the Lord, is Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, which is, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, that God prepared beforehand that we might walk in them. When I think of who God is, for me, it's love. God is love. Everything that love brings, everything that love is, everything that love changes, God is love. God is love.